Hello, BookTube, and happy Friday to you all. I don't know, I think probably most of you did not catch the epic live stream on Mike's channel, Pints and Paperbacks, last night. It went long. It went longer than we thought, and as I suspected, we veered off of Edgar Rice Burroughs' novel, The Gods of Mars, fairly early on, and seldom returned to it. In fact, we hit on a motherload of other topics. It was great fun. My main regret is that all of my co-hosts had beers. All of them were just, casually drinking as we were talking. And I was not. It was a work night, as most nights are. So I wasn't doing that. I felt a little bit increasingly out of step with the conversation. And my end, anyway, was plagued by technical problems that I'm going to have to correct. I'm going to have to find a way to correct those, because teleconferencing, which is basically what we were doing in this live stream, is the future. On this platform and every other platform, in every kind of line of work, in every kind of social interaction, the longer these quarantining and state lockdowns go on, the more people are acclimating themselves to not doing things in person. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually kind of wonderful. So I have to get better at this. I feel certain that the technological flaws on the live stream were my fault. And I don't think they affected anybody else. So in your feed, if you're subscribed to Mike at Pints and Paperbacks, I'll leave a link to it down below. You're going to look and say, oh, live stream, isn't that fun? And then you're going to look at the time. The duration of the thing is monstrous. I talk about, well, a lot of you say that you play these things while you're cooking or while you're out in the garden or while you're walking around. So there you go. Anyway, today is Friday, and on Fridays I have gotten into the habit of doing an extra comic book video. So those of you who aren't interested in comic books, that's what this is going to be. So no reason to watch. It won't hurt my feelings. You've got thousands of other videos to watch. And on Fridays I was going to talk about a graphic novel, but I haven't gone back to a graphic novel this week. This has been a fairly active work week, so I haven't done that. So instead I'm just going to go through another batch of back issues. I'm going through the back issues in my long cardboard long boxes, one little handful at a time, just so that we can cover all the back issues, because there are so few new issues coming out. All sorts of new developments. The landscape is fluid. The landscape is changing as to whether or not DC Comics, for instance, working through a couple of new quasi-distributors, are sending out issues to comic shops, and that might be of interest to people in locales where the comic shops are open, where in some places quarantines are lifting today, and in other places quarantines are slated to lift in mid-May, end of May. And comic book companies, DC especially, but Marvel also, they're starting to realize they can't exist if they don't make product. So they have to make product and get it out there somehow. The arrangement that DC has sort of worked out is with two big comic book shops who have been distributing comics in their own business model for years. DC had the if it ain't broke, don't fix it idea of just co-opting those networks and using them to distribute their product. And it's been getting pushback from some retail distributors, some comic book shop owners in the rest of the country, who accurately point out that those two comic services that are distributing their comics are also their competitors. I saw an email from one comic book owner whose shop is less than 30 minutes away from I think Midtown Comics is one of the big distributors, and this guy's shop is an easy car ride away. So he is being asked by DC Comics to receive the largesse, to become part of the business plan of a rival. And that you're going to have bumps like that as you try to remake a system from the ground up. I watched a live stream of a bunch of comic book shop owners and the owner of Diamond Distributors, which was for a long time the only distribution venue for superhero comics to specialty shops, Marvel and DC, and a whole bunch of other people too. And this guy, the owner of Diamond Comics, is he is what the chosen people would refer to as a mensch. He's a terrific guy, smart, funny, quick-brained, and as generous as the day is long. Just incredibly generous. If he can do you a solid, he will. And it won't matter to him if plenty of people have said this to him over his life, have said, I can't do anything like repaying anything of this right now, but I might down the line, and he doesn't care. And that is fantastic. So he was on a live stream, and I think it's loyalty to him, personal loyalty to him, that's keeping the whole idea of his company afloat at the moment, because his company has rather badly failed. It stopped distributing Maybe it had to do that during the worst of the initial panic over this pandemic. But it also started shorting its bills and isn't sure when it's going to come back. That if you're a comic book store, you need better than that from your distributor, no matter how nice the owner is. But anyway, that is all in flux. There were some new comics this week. I, of course, like most people in the country, I think I am not going to go to a comic shop. Like most people in the country, I am not going to defy the recommendations of health experts. I'm not going to do it, especially not in a hotspot state like Massachusetts. So it doesn't so much interest me, but other people will get to go to comic stores, but not me. And I'm not going to get these things electronically. I don't want them electronically. So we're not going to talk about them. Instead, we're going to talk about the good old days. We're going to talk about old comics. So what have we got here to start with? Well, we go to the 1980s when the whole world made sense. And this is Justice League, number 192 and 193. Which I was a big fan. I am a big fan of Justice League, always have been, except in the last 4 years. But at any other time, in almost every incarnation, there was one infamous period where I wasn't a fan, and neither was anybody else, where the team relocated to a neighborhood in Detroit. But other than that, yes, huge fan, and a huge fan of the animated series. OMG. The animated series, oh my. But these I got mainly for a reason that will be familiar now to some of you who have been watching these old comics videos, and that is the artwork. The art is here by George Perez, who's terrific. He's just amazing. Even now, at the beginning of his career, this was relatively, he had many, he's a very fast artist, but he had many credits racked up, but still, I believe this was his first appearance ever on the Justice League. And that was great, because he has a special joy. It's a special joy for him to do teen books. And this is I believe it ended up being a 3-part story that reinvents the origin of the android Justice Leaguer, the Red Tornado. I didn't so much care about the writing, of course, but I love the artwork. Okay. All right, talk about loving the artwork. Okay, this is from 1972. And this was an era in 1972 when DC Comics got the distribution rights to Edgar Rice Burroughs' properties, and mainly Tarzan, and they flew with it. They put great talent in it and created something that we've seen on these back issue videos before, which is a great run. The idea of a great run, when an artist and a writer team up on a book and produce a great arc of that book. And it might go into other hands after that, but that arc will be remembered in readers' minds as a high point of that character. And I mentioned that very often the thing that makes a great arc possible is when the writer and artist are the same person. When the whole book is given over into one set of hands. That can often cause that to happen. And that did with DC Comics. This is Tarzan of the Apes #1. And they gave the thing to Joe Kubert. And it is amazing. Just amazing. Look at this, a classic. The origin story, the first issue, the typical first issue origin story of Tarzan has been done a million times. It's been done in elaborate Sunday comics of a type so elaborate that modern day readers mostly don't know about Sunday comics at all. Most of them are gone. And even though if you have an inset that has Sunday comics, I think the Boston Globe might still, you won't have any idea from that inset what Sunday comics used to be. They used to be operatically gorgeous, and some of the greatest artists in the world did them. And the story of Tarzan's origin was done for that. It was done for books. It was done for it's a classic story of a human boy who is orphaned and raised by apes, and who teaches himself. He goes back to the old the cabin where his parents were murdered, and teaches himself how to read. Incredible. And see that? Look at that. Pages falling out of this thing. That's how long I've had this. And this issue is Joe Kubert. He writes it and draws it, and it's amazing. Just amazing. Let me give you another piece of his artwork. Yeah, there we go. There's the boy, Tarzan, fighting an ape, realizing that he can't, of course, compete strength for strength, that he needs to do other things. This was a multi-part origin story. It went on for, I think, the first 3 issues of DC's Tarzan, and there's a long feature on Edgar Rice Burroughs a long text feature, and then the backup feature will be of interest to some of you. The backup feature is the beginning of John Carter of Mars. There he is. There's our John Carter of Mars in a cave in Arizona. He's looking down at his body, and he is about to find himself on the plains of Mars. And you can see this is oh my God, I'm blanking on this artist's name. I know this artist's name very well. I know his work very well. I'm blanking on his name, but you can see a problem that I have with John Carter of Mars, which is that he's always drawn as an older man, someone in his 50s, and that isn't what we're told about him. But the reason that it may be of interest is because there was just a live stream. It was just an epic live stream that went on forever and ever, and was a part of our Marsathon event. I have an event that I'm doing with a bunch of other booktubers where we read the John Carter of Mars novels, one a month, for the rest of 2020, and we have from time to time talked about adaptations. There's John Carter realizing that he can jump enormous distances because he is from Earth. But anyway, this turned out to be a great run. The Joe Kubert run on Tarzan is a signature thing. It is a signature thing because of how good it is. Okay, here's another run. This is another run. This is Romita on Spider-Man, but not John Romita Sr. This is an unprecedented thing in comic books. The closest you would get would be if Andy Kubert, Joe Kubert's son, were to draw Tarzan. Something like that. And that is John Romita Jr., who took up the mantle of his father, John Romita Sr., and started drawing Spider-Man. Has drawn Spider-Man in a number of different times in the character's run. This is from the 1990s, I believe. Oh, no. 1982. Oh, how time flies. And this is drawn by John Romita Jr., and this is a great issue where he fights the unstoppable Juggernaut, an X-Men villain who is Class 100 strength. He's totally unbeatable. He can go toe-to-toe with Thor and the Hulk, so Spider-Man can't do anything to him. And that is made clear in this issue. This is not one of the... Marvel Comics is not one of those... the modern era Marvel Comics is not one of those where any hero can win at any time. Spider-Man has no chance against Juggernaut. And he comes up in this issue with a last-ditch effort to stop Juggernaut, and that is to drive a tanker truck, directly at him. And Spider-Man leaps out of the driving cabin and leaps away because, as he says, well, whether or not he can survive this, I can't. I better leap away as fast as I can. And then we get this great page. This thing won't hurt me. Nothing can. And then explosion, it just explodes. And his Juggernaut's Confederate on the river, watching it with binoculars, is stunned and says, Lord Almighty, I thought only an atom bomb could produce an explosion like that. Spider-Man says, what have I done? A Juggernaut must have been incinerated instantly. Not even his force field could possibly have withstood the blast. And he says, no, it's not possible. Because of course it is. Nothing stops the Juggernaut. That was an awesome issue. Okay, then we go back. Oh my. Is this 1970? When is this? This is, wow, 1970. Yep, this is 1970. This is, it isn't credited here. It's Bob Kanigher, though, I believe, and it doesn't matter to me because I got it because of its Gil Kane artwork. This is The Flash. Gil Kane, the artist, had a run on on The Flash for a while, and I am a huge fan of his artwork. I am not a huge fan of The Flash at all. Character runs fast. Okay, got it. Same reason I'm not a huge fan of the Hulk. Green, got it. No complexity at all. The fans of these characters would say otherwise. Flash has a huge fan base, huge. But I think I got this mostly for the artwork. This was the Julie Schwartz era of DC Comics. Someday, if we're lucky, a comic book nerd, someday we'll get a biography of Julia Schwartz. I don't know if one's ever been written. It would have had to been for a small specialty press if it ever was. But man, oh man, so much of what we know about comics, so much of that culture, he is the unsung Stan Lee. And that's amazing to me because there are biographies of Stan Lee, plenty of them. There's one coming out in May. I don't think there's ever been a popular biography of Julie Schwartz, and that's a shame, because he deserves one. And I mostly know his era in DC Comics for Superman, the Superman titles, where he made an indelible imprint. Okay. All right, this next one is an issue of Green Arrow. Now, Green Arrow is another character where I'm just usually not interested. Okay, arrows, got it. What you can't do that for the characters I am interested in. The characters are inherently complex. Spider-Man, for instance. Captain America, Thor. Where you have to get into it a little just to describe the character. But Green Arrow was always, all right, arrows. But I have to admit, an attempt was made in later decades to make Green Arrow more interesting, to invest him with a huge personality, to make it about his personality, not about his gimmick. And so I did find that interesting. And a lot of times his individual comics, when he's had a run on his comic, have been drawn by really good people. There was a run by an artist named Scott McDaniel, who's incredible. I mentioned him last time as a great artist for Batman, but he did a run on Green Arrow that was worth finding. It was amazingly good. And so have others. And this is one of them. This was when the penciler was Rodolfo DiMaggio, whose work I just love. I just think it's fantastic. I don't know if he works in comics anymore. But this is a bad issue. I mean, his artwork is beautiful. I'll show it to you. But there's a thing that happens in comic books. And this is a perfect illustration of it, where some writer will write a hypothetical future story. And we'll see older versions of our characters, and we'll see things happen to them that are permanent, which of course doesn't happen in normal comics, or shouldn't, didn't used to. And sometimes those future stories, those hypothetical what-if future stories, become really popular. They become really, really popular. Fans love them. Like, for instance, Days of Future Past in the X-Men, where Chris Claremont just wrote a story about one possible future, but it became really popular with the fans. And that has a tendency with bad writers, weaker writers, to just think, well, okay, this was really popular with the fans, so how about if I start laying the groundwork for that story, as if it's canon. Future stories are not canon. You shouldn't ever do that. But writers do. And so whenever I see a big hypothetical future story like that become really popular, at the same time that I'm eating it up and loving reading it, I'm also dreading what's coming, because I know that there are going to be writers who are going to try to make that canon. And the most popular what if alternate future history, possible future history in comic books, is Batman Dark Knight Returns, where we see a 50-something Batman, a 50-something Bruce Wayne who has given up being Batman. The world has gone to hell. All the heroes have scattered one way or another. I remember getting Dark Knight Returns as it was coming out in its individual square-bound issues, 4 issues in a row. And the first one was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. A hero rebirth issue to top them all. And the second one was the one that started to drop hints that Frank Miller wasn't just going to reimagine. Frank Miller was the artist and writer who did this, and that he wasn't just going to reimagine Batman. He was also going to reimagine Superman, and it wasn't going to be pretty. And I'm a huge fan of Superman. I remember the feeling distinctly. I remember exactly where I was. I remember exactly which beagles I had. I remember the feeling distinctly of reading that second issue and thinking, oh no, he's going to turn Superman into a Republican stooge, into a laughingstock. And sure enough, he did that. But in addition, in the course of the book, he also gives us hints of the futures of other DC heroes. One specific page where we get tossed off mentions of the fates of some of them. Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, returns to the stars. Diana, Wonder Woman, returns to her people. And there was another fate of a DC hero in that story. A hypothetical future story. And that hero was Green Arrow. When we meet him, he's old, and he's got scraggly gray hair and only one arm. His bow arm is missing. And it becomes pretty clear by implication in the course of that his bow arm was burned off by Superman's heat vision. He mentions owing Superman one. And knowing Frank Miller, it would have been the story. It would have been that it was burned off at the behest of Ronald Reagan or whatever. It's never made clear in Dark Knight Returns, and in his defense, that is a strength of Frank Miller, is that he doesn't always draw you a roadmap. He considers that adults take pleasure in inference, and so he never makes it clear. But when I saw that, I thought, okay, it's bad enough that writers are going to be tempted to make a Republican stooge out of Superman, but even worse if they start to develop an antagonism between Superman and Green Arrow. And sure enough, in this issue of Green Arrow, he is on a plane, a little plane, and a villain has caused a trap to spring that locks his bow arm in a vise. And there's explosives on board the plane. So if he doesn't disarm that lock, then he's doomed. And then Superman shows up, and Green Arrow, I don't know if you can see, he calls him the Big Blue, which is what he calls him in Dark Knight Returns. And you can see right there that the scenario here is that Superman burns his arm off to save his life. And the writer, who is the writer here? Chuck Dixon, is working against that by saying, well, okay, that's I'm going to raise that specter, but then I'm not going to have it happen. Instead, I'm going to have Green Arrow apparently die. Of course, that's ridiculous. No main hero dies, but still, that was a horrifying moment for me. It's terrific otherwise. The artwork is just amazing otherwise. There's Green Arrow as Robin Hood and whatnot, but that moment gave me the willies. Okay, all right. Then we have. Okay, this is something that maybe some of you are going to be big fans. This is DC's Vertigo line before they tanked it. And this is the star of the Vertigo line, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, the character of Sandman. And that could have been male. Oh my God. I didn't like Sandman, of course. It was all artsy-fartsy. And once Neil Gaiman started becoming an intellectual god to all of the kids in his letters column, I just didn't even look at it much. And I never bought it, except for this issue. This is a special issue, number 50. And the reason I got it isn't because of Neil Gaiman. It's because it's drawn by P. Craig Russell, who is an artist we've seen before. And I love his work. Absolutely love it. So I got this issue. So there you go, you Sandman fans. I have one Sandman issue. Then we have Marvel Fanfare. I mentioned Marvel Fanfare a couple of times. This was a one-shot series where you'd get standalone stories, one and done. You'd get pin-ups, that sort of thing. A tryout for inventory items, a tryout for new artists and new writers, a very good thing for a comic book company to do. I don't know that Marvel Fanfare was ever all that popular a title, but I loved it. I thought it was just usually one of the things that I really loved about it was that you weren't on the hook for a series. You could just get a couple of issues depending on who was in it. Maybe that made its sales so uneven that they couldn't do it. But this is Frank Miller. And this is Frank Miller working against type, as we say. When was this? This must have been very early. 1985. This is 1985, and it's written by Roger Stern, but it's drawn by Frank Miller, and it's Captain America. The very last character you would expect this guy to know or understand at all. And yet, it's a very good issue. And it climaxes, of course, with Captain America running back into a burning building because he has to save the flag. And I've kept it all these years because Marvel Fanfare, when it had great issues, those issues were memorably great. And the reason I kept them is the same reason that I would have today. Because an individual standalone thing like this, you don't know where it's going to get collected. For all I know, this Captain America Frank Miller story has been collected in some Marvel Visionaries volume, Frank Miller artwork or whatnot, that will have lots of stuff I won't want. So I've kept the individual issue the whole time. Then we go to the Mighty Thor. A lot of you may have wondered where the Mighty Thor was. He's back. This is a fill-in issue. This would have been the kind of thing that Marvel Fanfare would have done, where Marvel would sometimes do this, where they would just have a writer and artist would knock out a story and they would just warehouse it. It was always going to be a self-contained thing, and then they would have it in case they needed a fill-in issue, in case they needed something else. And that was the case here. This is Thor number 370, and this is a fill-in issue of Thor in the Old West. This is a rare instance where John Buscema did a cover that was really good. And he also does the interior artwork, and it also is really good. Just there's Loki riding an old iron locomotive with his trolls and everything. And you've got the old prospectors and everything. I enjoyed it a lot. And once again, I kept it because I have no idea where it would ever turn up. I maybe as Marvel Comics continues to do essential volumes, reprinting all of Thor, maybe this will be in the appropriate essentials volume. This issue took place right in the middle of Walt Simonson's great run on the character. That is why the logo box has Walt Simonson's artwork, whereas this is John Buscema's artwork. This took place right in the middle of that run, so it could be that it'll be in a volume someday, or maybe it has been already, but I kept it anyway just in case, because I like to revisit it. Oh, okay. All right, this is a perfect example. This is Marvel Fanfare, and this is an explicitly pin-up issue. This has no stories at all. This is just artwork. Look at this. This is a John Byrne cover. That is John Byrne. And there are all the characters in Marvel. Look at that. They're all lining up to get on the podium and have their picture taken. Isn't that an awesome cover? And this is just full of pinups. That's all it is. So this is Mike Kaluta, I believe. That was Shadowcat, Kitty Pryde when she was called Shadowcat. Some of these will, of course, be better than others. There's John Romita Jr. When he was doing Iron Man, he did a pinup of Iron Man, all the various armors. Rick Leonardi. Yeah, Rick Leonardi doing Colossus, bursting through Russian billboard. Look at that. Mike Mignola doing Prince Namor the Submariner. How nice. So no text. But again, where will this ever be reprinted? Where will I ever see it again? I don't know that I will. So I kept it. Oh my. All right. Well, you literature fans, you sidle up now close. This is Marvel Comics. This is from 1977. This is the Odyssey. This is the Classics Illustrated version of the Odyssey. There, look at that. There are the suitors. They're getting theirs. Oh my. I wish right now that I had all of these. I really do. I had them all at one point or another, but the only ones I kept were the Odyssey and the Iliad, and I have them somewhere. I have the Iliad somewhere. We will encounter it in this. Okay, all right. How are we doing for time? All right, we'll wrap up soon here. So we're still not going to get done with this pile. I always bite off more than I can chew here. This is something that should have been a great run. I talked about great runs where someone puts a definitive stamp on a character, and usually it's because the someone is both the writer and the artist, so they can shape the whole arc of what they're doing. Mike Mignola, for instance, the artist we just saw with that Submariner pinup, did that with his own signature character, Hellboy, where he was the artist and the writer to get that character off the ground. And those like 4 Mike Mignola Hellboy trade paperbacks that are brilliant, just amazing to have. And another one like that, another creation like that never really took off, and I think mainly because if you're going to be a writer-artist combo, you have to be pretty good at writing, is Eric Larson's The Savage Dragon. We've mentioned this character a couple of times before. He's a big green guy with a pterodactyl fin on his head, who is super strong. He's invulnerable, and he was found in a field. He has no idea who he is, and he decides to join the police and put his superpowers to use fighting bad guys. And I don't know, the first run on Savage Dragon, the first few, maybe the first dozen issues are very good, very interesting. Eric Larson has made a point of saying, I'm going to do this until I get to issue 1,000 or 2,000 or 5 million or whatever it is. He's made a point of keeping this going. It's long since past its sell-by date, so it's incomprehensible now. But a long, long time ago, this is from... when 1997, a long time ago, the natural impulse on the part of comic book fans was to see some of these creator star characters team up, and that happened. Eric Larson and Mike Mignola got together for the Savage Dragon, teaming up with Hellboy, with artwork by Eric Larson in his inimitable style. And in this issue, we get the heroes fight, and then they team up, and there's some great comic bits. It's clear that is this written by Eric Larson? I think it is. Yeah, there's some bits of Hellboy stuff in here that are good. They're very good. Hellboy fans will recognize them right away. Like, for instance, his notoriously bad sense of aim You can't hit what he's shooting at. But another thing that happened in this issue that hadn't happened in Hellboy's own comics is that Hellboy is quantified. Mike Mignola had gone out of his way not to do that. But in the first issue, this is the second part of this team up. And in the first part of this team up, when our heroes are fighting each other, it quickly becomes apparent that Savage Dragon outclasses Hellboy in terms of physical power. And actually says at one point, says to Hellboy, I'm sorry, I thought you could lift a city bus and tear it in two with your bare hands. And Hellboy says, no, I can't do that. Savage Dragon can. Hellboy can't. And I found that a little dispiriting. I don't know where the other part of this team up is. But we're gonna have to wrap this up. So I will stop with this next one, and then we will move on from there. Oh boy, we have a lot more to go. I gotta make these. I gotta pick smaller handful. But we'll stop with this one, with this next one. This is from 1977, and this is Marvel Comics got the comic book rights to a TV show called The Man from Atlantis. And they did it. Bless their hearts, they did it. They did a whole origin story for this character that was on the it was on TV, and I forget the name of the actor who played the Man from Atlantis, but it was fairly ambitious stuff for. So we have Bill Mantlo as the artist. Frank Robbins does the artwork for the second feature. This is an extra-sized issue. The first feature is drawn by Sutton and Trinidad. Joe Sutton? I don't recognize this artwork at all. It looks like Frank Springer to me. But this is a story. None of you will know what this is, of course. Of a certain age, you might. The 2-hour movie that introduced this character on TV is actually very well done. And a man is found face down in the water on the shore. He's brought to a hospital. The female doctor on call realizes almost too late that the reason the character isn't breathing is because he has gills instead of lungs, and we need to bring him back to the water. And it's a great scene. She hurries him. She insists. She overrides the reservations of her colleagues, gets him back to the shore, and she's rolling him around face down in the water saying, come on, don't prove me wrong. In the back of her mind, she's clearly thinking, don't make a murderer of me. And then he revives. She was right. And he has no memory of who he is. But he is a thoroughly adapted aquatic being. This cover is inaccurate. The character on TV and in this comic does not have webs on his hands or on his feet. He's a humanoid who is just adapted for swimming underwater, so he can withstand enormous pressure. He can breathe underwater. He can swim incredibly fast underwater. And there are some bits and pieces in that first 2-hour movie that are very well done. There's a scene where he races a dolphin in a pool to see how fast he is. When you think back to when this was made, in the 1970s, that is a tricky thing to do. And sometimes the original 2-hour movie does things very simply and still manages to have them be very, very effective. There's one point where our main character and another diver are all suited up with pressure suits. They are going down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. They're going 5 miles down, where the pressure is unbelievable and where they absolutely, need the protection of their gear. And we see the two divers side by side on their platform as they are in electronic communication with the control booth. And we see the one diver is talking with the control, and we see that as he's talking, unbeknownst to him, he's not turning his head. This character is slowly taking his diving gear off until finally the other diver turns to consult with him and sees an undressed person just sort of floating there, clearly breathing, right next to him. And then he swims off. That is an amazing scene. That is amazingly well done, considering what a hash it would be today with CGI and whatnot. And I confess, I thought it was kind of neat. I immediately started creating fan fiction stories about fan ideas. There was no fan fiction at the time. I started creating fan ideas that, of course, what this character is a take on Prince Namor the Submariner. Prince Namor the Submariner was the son of an Atlantean woman, a woman from a blue-skinned race of beings who evolved to live under the ocean. They're aquatic. They're not amphibious. They can only survive for a little bit of time out of the water. And a human man, a human lighthouse keeper. Prince Namor is a mutant. He has pale skin. He has no webs on his fingers. He doesn't have any of the Atlantean physical features. He doesn't have visible gills. He can survive for long periods of time in the open air, and he's super strong, invulnerable to pain, has wings on his feet that give him the ability to fly and whatnot. And I automatically think, okay, what if there had been such a pairing, maybe an Atlantean man and a human woman, and the offspring had still been a mutant, so looks human, but can breathe underwater and withstand the incredible crushing pressures of the bottom of the ocean. But maybe this mutation worked differently and this character doesn't have super strength. That comes out of nowhere. Super strength and invulnerability is not a quality that's possessed by either parent of Prince Namor. What would happen if there were an Atlantean who was just a hybrid with very few mutations? That would be this. That was my number one theory at the time that I belabored the ears of poor comic shop owners. But anyway, we're going to stop with Man from Atlantis. We'll stop there. I kick myself when I think of Man from Atlantis because I had all those issues. I bought them all and I really liked them. They were hokey, but I really liked them. And I got rid of them over time except for this first one. And there was a time when I was up in Vermont. I was at the old farmhouse in Vermont, and Mark Richardson and I went to an antique mart, a big, sprawling antique mart. And tucked away in one corner of that mart was a comic book collection, a vast comic book collection. You saw it. I've talked about it many times. But one time I went there, and in another place, a little alcove usually reserved for old Star Trek novels, somebody had bundled all the issues of Man from Atlantis in a plastic bundle for $15, and I didn't get it. I could kick myself. I could absolutely kick myself. I should have done it. I didn't do it. What a fun that would be to have all those issues. But anyway, we're going to wrap this up for now. That was an enormous comic book video. Sorry. I'll be back. We'll talk about books. Thank you, Book 2.